Everybody get up, no need to cram now. We got a real jam going down, going down, going down, going down, going down, going down. Welcome to the IntelliJAMS.
All right, we are back to jam, my favorite types of jams. I got a guest joining me today. I've got Brandon Maskell. He does consulting for a lot of different e-com brands. A lot of those are IntelliJAMS customers. And Brandon, I'm excited to jam with you because I think one thing that comes up a lot when we talk about experimentation and we talk about testing is figuring out what to test, but more importantly, like communicating it with the rest of the team, the squad, executive leadership, whoever that might be, so that that program can be as successful as possible. So I'm hoping we can kind of jam in the intersection of like actually running the test, but more importantly, making sure that people know the value, what's going on. Is this worth doing? And like making sure that it's matching the strategic directions. So you work across a ton of different brands. You have to deal with a lot of different personalities, processes, whatever. Like, do you have like tips for anyone listening on like how do you even align on the right type of tests to do? Like, you don't just get started. You got to know where we're going.
Yeah, for sure. I guess let me first off say that I'm an avid reader of the newsletter, follow the podcast.
We
so
love to hear
stoked to
it.
be on here speaking with you today. Yeah, I mean, if I go back even further in my experience in e-commerce, so where I kind of got my first experience with testing was at TaylorMade Golf. They had a relatively mature kind of setup program. We were using Optimizely back in the day. But one of the first things I had to do there was build executive trust on why we were spending money. Optimizely is not a cheap tool. IntelliJAMS is much cheaper and I think probably a better tool. But there was just always a question of, one, the tools we're paying for, two, the resources we're putting behind it. We had to use our internal developers to develop the test. So there's definitely a lot of resources going into the testing program. So right away, one of the first things I did was put some thought behind how we're going to communicate that to executives at the company to understand what the ROI was on the program, which is at the end of the day, what they're looking for. So I got to start there. As you mentioned today, I work across several brands that are IntelliJAMS customers that are running testing programs of varying degrees of maturity, but on the same token, they all require the same things in terms of communication, understanding what they're testing. So going back to your first question on what should you be testing, I think the first thing is having a clear line of communication with, in the case of some of my clients, the executive team, right? Which is looking at the macro environment, looking at the business as a whole. You know, just by definition, CRO, right? Conversion rate optimization. I think you guys have kind of put this in the ether these days that really it's profit optimization. There's really different goals that can come from testing. I mean, I work with one brand in particular that, you know, at the end of last year, they were really trying to just clear inventory, right? So that's a very different end goal than maximizing profit, but you can still use IntelliJAMS and testing tools and running different tests to get to that goal, you know, example being price testing. So, you know, it comes down to meeting with them, aligning with them, having conversations on what they're seeing from the top as the priorities, and then distilling that down into a testing kind of framework and roadmap of how do we address those. So, you know, some of the things that come to mind are, you know, UPT, maximization, AOV, obviously profit, there's clearing inventory, there's top line revenue. Like there's just a bunch of different things that can be kind of the North Star. Really, at the end of the day, it's profit, but there's kind of obviously goals that come off of that. So I think that's a good starting point, is just talking and having an open line of communication.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, as an avid listener and reader, CRO is not the end game. And like you were saying, and it's all about like, we want to make more money as a business. Like that's everyone's ultimate end goal. But like you were saying, there's a lot of different flavors there. And I think that's one thing that like I'm always encouraging people to do is, whether it's like it's a board of directors, it's a founder, it's your boss, it's some, like, we're always communicating the value of something.
Yep.
And even just asking things like, what's keeping you up at night? What's the strategic direction right now? Cause like you were saying, like, the strategic direction right now is like, we're sitting on so much inventory that we need to move. Like, I actually don't care about anything else
Yep.
other than that right now. So it's like building these experimentation roadmaps around like an actual goal that's relevant and important right now, but knowing that this is all in service of, hey, we want to make more, be more profitable.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think once you have alignment on what the larger goal is, again, then you can break that down into kind of smaller goals and or what then testing opportunities there are, right? So you guys have obviously popularized price testing, shipping threshold testing, which I think if I think back even probably a year or two ago, I didn't really hadn't heard of many brands doing that at all. So I think that's a whole new kind of world that, you know, the more sophisticated brands have leaned into and are really seeing positive results. I mean, a couple of the ones I work with specifically have run them last year, had good results. Um, you know, going back to the communication side, and once you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, the next piece is how do you stay in touch and make sure that
Yep.
the stakeholders are up to speed. The worst thing that can happen is you go off and start running tests and either they're failing and you're not communicating that, or you're having big wins and those aren't also being communicated. And that's not then allowing you to get additional resources and put more, you know, kind of velocity behind the program. So I've seen a lot of different flavors of it, right? So going way back with Optimizely, they had a project planning kind of road mapping tool built into the platform. I think VWO has something similar. You know, I'm sure you guys are looking into something like that. But at the same time, I've worked with other brands that are using Google Sheets, right? So it really doesn't matter. I think the key is to be as organized as possible. So, you know, a spreadsheet that I've worked with a couple of brands on is pretty straightforward, right? You have columns for things like what is the hypothesis? What page is it going to run on? What is the test? What is the potential impact? And really one of the key things I think in a spreadsheet or a roadmap like that is having some type of scoring system. I mean, CXL popularized a couple. There's many out there, right? But at the end of the day, you're looking at what is the level of effort to implement the test, and then what is the potential impact. Obviously, we'd like to start with the high impact, low effort things.
Yep.
But as you go and you clear off kind of the low hanging fruit, right, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So having a clear document that shows really how you've turned your research and customer research into ideas and how you can put those, whether it's 10, whether it's 100, whatever, there should be a clear prioritization and a clear layout of if we want to do this, how will we do it? Expected start time, expected end time. And then, you know, once you've actually run the test, recording those results. What I always encourage brands to do post-mortem, and this is getting a little bit easier in your platform because you have the AI summaries and stuff,
Yep.
but is to do a post-mortem and basically do a write-up, which would be kind of an executive summary of what the test was all about, right? What was the goal? How did we run it? What do the 2 variations or 3 variations look like? So executives, again, that aren't in the tool have an idea of what did this actually look like? What were the results? Were they what we expected? Were they not? And then what's the next step, right? Is it a positive test and we want to iterate off it? Was it something that failed and we, again, want to try a different variation of it? Do we use tools like Clarity or other tools to then go dig into the data and understand, did the test actually run the way we thought it did, right? Like that's something you can do in Clarity is go filter down by people that saw a test. You can go look at the treatment, make sure everything's kind of kosher. And really then that helps you decide what the next step is.
There's a few things you hit on there. Hey, one of the columns is the hypothesis. I think like we can get so caught up in like building a roadmap of things to go do to keep us busy that that hypothesis can get lost. And I think like, as you were talking about communicating this up to the executive side, like the hypothesis matching into one of those goals that we were talking about, like I believe by doing X, we're going to see Y, and that relates into our strategic direction because of this. Here's what we expect. Defining that hypothesis ahead of time makes it so much easier to communicate after the experiment has run and like actually have an intelligent conversation with someone. If that's missing at the beginning, it can go under so much scrutiny, and you spend more time talking about what happened, why, everything, that like you lose time. And having that roadmap ready to go, like you never want to be sitting idle for too long, because idle non-testing time is basically an opportunity cost, right? You're not learning something that could improve the business.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to get into bad habits. And this comes from the way we communicate today through Teams, Slack, there's just these quick little ideas that come at you. And you can get into a bad habit where you just start taking action on those things right away, and you haven't actually taken the time to do the research to understand if it's even worth your time, right? So a perfect example would be you get an idea for some small change on the site. And what I say all the time to the brands I work with is, one, do you even have the traffic to run that test, right? Is it a small
Yep.
change? Is it going to take 3 months to get valid data? And really, when you weigh that against kind of the impact, a lot of times they die on the vine and it's just, this isn't worth our time. I'd also say that having that roadmap doc really defined and built out with, like, the columns I mentioned, and just have it super detailed. It almost forces you, as long as you follow a process, to enter every idea into that document, to really put the time and vet it out and make sure that you're not spinning your wheels and spending time on things that aren't actually going to pan out to be anything. So again, a lot of A/B testing and testing in general, I think, is process driven, right? You have to have a hypothesis. You have to then create variants that you think have potential to beat the control. You have to run the test. You have to run the test properly. You have to let it run for long enough. You have to be able to interpret the results. So there's a lot of process driven things that I think if you start skipping steps, you can get into a lot of trouble. And even in the worst cases, actually pushing things live that actually aren't improving your business.
Yeah. And like you said, hey, high impact, low effort. Those are great. But they always will come before the high impact, high effort, which could be an even bigger swing in the direction that you want to do. So like having this so that something comes in and I can rank it and I can see like, hey, what is the potential impact of this? Because you can just keep on going after kind of those easy wins all the time and probably find like plus 2%, plus 5%, and like keep on kind of like optimizing. But it's not till you actually that like can prove that you should start one of these bigger things. And I would say, like, when you're talking about price testing, this is usually a bigger thing for a lot of brands when you're communicating. It's like, oh, change my price by 20%. Like I could never. But when you're able to place it in order and like you said, hey, Slack everything, like, Brandon, I have a killer idea. And if it just goes into Slack and you just like prioritize it, you'll never get to the high impact, high effort one because you're just going to like keep picking off the small stuff.
Yeah. I mean, specifically on the thing you just said, actually, I think this was at TaylorMade. We made a process by which people couldn't even submit ideas if they weren't sent to, we had a form or an intake kind of set up where they could actually fill in the base pieces of what the idea was. And that, when people have to put effort for it, it clears out some of the the stuff that's probably not worth our time. Going back to the just high level of ideas and low hanging fruit and all that, I think from what I've seen, obviously there's businesses at different levels of maturity with testing. I think most that kind of get started on your platform, for example, there's kind of what I would call phase one of testing, which is there is certainly a playbook of, I'd say there's probably close to 20 tests you could go run tomorrow that are viable tests that any e-commerce business could run that are probably relevant, right? So some things that come to mind are the way you display images on the PDP. Right now, I see a lot of sites today with kind of what I would call like the Nike setup of the two columns. Before it was, the image with the thumbnails. There's using stickies, sticky add to cart, sticky filters, all these types of things that are really usability changes that I think are playbook type tests that I've seen be very successful. So I'm not discounting the idea of doing them. The challenge becomes once you've cleared out all those ideas, right? And hopefully had a lot of winners. It's, to your point, what are we going to do that's actually going to materially change the business? And really that comes from understanding what the goals of the business are. So tying back to what we said earlier, if it is profit, right? Okay, well, we should probably be looking at our pricing, right? To your point, it's maybe not an overnight change. Several of the brands I work with are omni-channel, right? Some of them can't just go willy-nilly go change prices on their site because they have wholesale relationships. Now, if you're pure D2C, pure play, then that's a lot easier and you can be changing prices all day long. But obviously every business has nuance. So once you get to kind of phase two and you have the bigger ideas, a couple things come to mind that I've worked with clients is usertesting.com. So if you're actually doing real user testing, you're writing scripts, you're asking people to go through processes because you've done the research to understand that there's a problem, like a perceived problem, and you want to get real feedback in terms of how people are thinking about the changes you've made. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff you can do on tools like that, right? You can show them wireframes, you can have them do an actual site experience, but the benefit there is you get qualitative feedback, right? So beyond just the clarities or hot jars or whatever, where you're seeing scroll depth and click and all that, you can actually have prompts where you ask people to give you responses on why they did what they did and their thought process going into it. So that stuff's super valuable. I mean, I don't see nearly enough brands spending time and effort to do focus groups, talk to their customers. When I was at TaylorMade, we had something called the player panel, which was, I think it originally originated from basically sending an email out to our database and asking about which people were interested in being more involved with the brand when it came to new product launches and all that. So we had a panel of, I think it was thousands of people that on a whim, we could just reach out to, get on the phone with them, do focus groups. So that information is incredibly valuable when it comes to ideating tests, because at the end of the day, we're all in these businesses every day. And I think we start to get a little bit of blinders as to what's going on outside of our sphere of our own site, and struggle a little bit to get into the mind of the actual consumer and put ourselves in their place.
The player panel is a fire name for that. That is well done. But I agree with what you're saying there is I end up saying this a lot as like the marketer here at IntelliJAMS. It's like someone will say something, I'm like, guys, we live this every single day. We are in the top 99% of knowing what IntelliJAMS can do, what you should do here. Same can be said in direct to consumer. Hey, I live and breathe this product every single day. I know everything about it. Like, it's obvious that it's this, but like, it might not be obvious to your customer base, especially if you are if you are not the customer. It is very hard to make like intuitive decisions all the time when you're not the customer.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think the more you can talk to customers, and obviously nowadays you have post-purchase surveys through, tools like No Commerce and all these. So it really comes down to timing for getting feedback, right? So as someone, for example, they're on their site, they place an order, you send them a survey right after, right? Like you might get a decent response rate. The further that goes out, the response rate goes down. So that's where these tools have come in on, for example, the checkout page, where it's like the person's right there making a decision. They'll spend a couple minutes to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think when I think about it, it goes back to kind of old school market research, right? It's hard. It's time consuming. I think a lot of people these days want the quick and easy win. They want, in today's age, they want the AI to just spit out the answers for them, which I think we're all hoping we get to the point where we can use a tool like Clarity. It can consume all these sessions and come up with these great ideas and tell you what to do. Unfortunately, I've seen this across Clarity. I've seen this across Quantum Metric and tools costing $100,000 a year. Is brands often invest in what I call Ferraris when they really need a Toyota, right? Like they don't have the staff,
nice, reliable Corolla.
Yeah, they don't have the resources in house to drive the Ferrari, let alone spend all day looking at sessions or building it out, right? So there's just a level of complexity that comes with consuming all that data and bringing it into a nice, neat package that can be used.
Yeah, and like you're seeing kind of like AI simulations too to drive test results, and like I think this comes back to like those kind of like smaller no-brainer things versus like, hey, this is tied to strategic direction, things that are specific to my business. Is like, maybe I can run AI simulations for like small UX changes where like it's very logic based, but like, what about the stuff that's more emotionally driven? Like people don't buy logically. They buy emotionally, and like that's going to be hard to simulate, do these things. So it's everything you were talking about, like post-purchase surveys, reviews, customer research. Like it's all going to help to understand where we should be testing. But also, again, those insights make it easier. Like at the top, we were talking about how do we communicate this to everyone? When you can tie the test to specific insights to build your hypothesis, you are creating a much more compelling story around why do it at all, instead of like, this is running, I'll let you know if it wins or loses. Then it's about a learning, not a result.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the need to build a level of trust, and that comes with having the information and or the story from start to end, right? if you think about how the average person running a testing program is going to be interacting with the executive team, it's probably once a week, or they're in some group meetings, and it's not like an everyday pulse check type thing, right?
Yep.
So in reality, what you're probably going to be doing is, hey, here's this idea. Here's why I think we should run it. You get the approval to run it. Probably don't talk to them again for another couple of weeks. They forget about it. They consume what you provide them. And then at the end, you could try to tie it up in the document I talked about. What they don't know is all the things that happened throughout those, let's call it 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, right? Is the data went up and down. We think these are the reasons these things happened. And that's why it really is important to be able to kind of bundle everything up, synthesize it down to what I would call an executive summary type level.
Yep.
So that they truly understand how this is working and why, and kind of the entire process. But without that, right? Like at the end of the day, they're the ones controlling budget and resources, right? So if you want to grow the program and show that it's something that should be invested in, you have to be able to paint that picture. The other thing I'll mention too is, at least in my experience, the VPs, CMOs, all them, they obviously know what A/B testing is. They're somewhat familiar. I found that very few of them have actually done it in practice, right? So there's definitely an education that generally needs to happen around what is statistical significance? What is a confidence interval? What are these things? Like, how are you actually sure that this is going to work if we push it live? And I've actually even seen further than that is a little, I mean, this is at previous companies, kind of some pushback to results we've gotten, right? And, it's like, how could that be true? Well, it's like, okay, well, here's how we ran the test. It was done properly. We had the variation set up, the treatments and all that. So the education piece can go a long way in building that trust to just having more, ability to build out the program and move faster.
I think like TLDR of what we're talking about here is stay organized.
Yeah.
Have the roadmap that people can come in and check on. Make sure there's a hypothesis that is driving each of these. Understand the impact and the effort. But I think the most important thing we got here is you have to communicate the value ongoing. And like, it's easier to wrap all of these experiments, these tests, whatever you're doing, into a story that relates into, at the beginning, you talked about the macro. Hey, we care about clearing inventory. Like, an analogy I like to use is, if someone's trying to prepare to run for a marathon and you start talking to them about things that are not to do with running the marathon, they're like, I don't care. I need to get this marathon done. And like, if you have anything to help me with the marathon, I'm all ears. If it's something that's happening, not the marathon, it's going to have to wait until this race is over, because it's all I have the capacity to think about. So relating it back into those macros, I think, is like the most important thing. Relate it back to that goal so that there's always constant, like you were saying, you want more resources, you want more time, you want the spotlight so that you can continue to grow this. That will happen when you can relate all these as a story back into that kind of like macro goal.
Yeah. And I think another thing to keep in mind is just the time period that testing takes. So I kind of relate it to SEO in a way, right? It's generally everybody, executives included, want instant gratification, right? You'd go spend money on SEO and you'd always hear from the SEO team, well, you don't just see the results overnight, right? So it's very like, we're in such a performance marketing world where you can go put $1 in and see if the dollar came back out.
Oh my God, so
that
true.
People are so used to having immediate data and results that when it comes to something like SEO or something like testing, where a test is going to take, let's say, minimum 2 weeks, sometimes more, there's like, okay, what's happening? What's going on? And so that's, again, where the education piece comes in of, hey, I can give you this read after 3 days and things look great, but just so you're aware, this could change dramatically, right? So setting realistic expectations in terms of timing. And then that's where the communication, the organization, so that, in a perfect world, you set these tests live, and then let's say on Mondays, you're sending out a Slack message or a weekly recap email so that all the stakeholders involved are up to speed on, hey, did performance go up or down? How close do we still think we're going to be, hitting significance at this time? What's next in the queue, so that, to your point, we're not wasting time in between tests? Because at the end of the day, right, I think the big wins that you talked about, they're pretty hard to find. right? So it takes a lot of losing and a lot of velocity to be able to get there. And that's obviously just part of testing. So the bigger ideas you can take swings at, and then the more velocity you can get through, the better your chances of driving, incremental revenue and profit over time.
Those are some words of wisdom right there. That's probably a good spot. I feel like we could go for 3 hours on this. That's probably a good spot to end this. But Brandon, before I let you go, anywhere where people can interact with you, LinkedIn, Twitter, where can the people get more?
Yeah, I'm not real big on social media. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on there. Otherwise, you can reach me at brandon@commercerevconsulting.com. If you have any interest in working together or just want to jam on some testing info, let's connect.
Maybe we'll get this communication guidelines into that GEM Academy, and we'll give it there. Come interact with it there. We'll put the link. We'll put the link in the show notes.
You won't find me on TikTok. You won't see a post in the last 5 years from Instagram. So I'm pretty anonymous on social media. I'm too old these days.
It's all good. We'll make you famous in the GEM Academy, and that's where people can come get you. But Brandon, this was amazing. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries. Talk to you later.